As a child, I fully believed I could fly. I would start on one end of my grandparents' house and sprint full speed from this end to the other and jump straight into the couch, parallel to the ground with my fist to the sky, pretending to be Superman. In celebration of the fact that James Gunn's Superman has just passed Man of Steel, making it the most successful solo Superman movie of all time, I've decided to lock in and finally make this video. Even though the movie's been out for 3 weeks, there's a lot of people who haven't seen it, so this video will be mostly spoiler-free. There's gonna be a segment with some spoilers, but I'll make sure to give you a warning and put a marker for where you can skip to. Anyways, Superman fans have been eagerly waiting for this film to come out and rehabilitate the image of the OG symbol of hope, Clark Kent. It has been 45 years since the last good Superman movie came out, and I know I'm not sorry, Man of Steel fans. My darling Kal-El has been through the ringer of character assassination, but I put my full faith into James Gunn to bring us back to basics and remind people why Superman is the most popular superhero of all time. And that's why I watched this movie day one in 4D, baby! Was it worth it? First, let's take a trip back to 1938. A lot of things happened that year, but I think the most important was the release of Action Comics #1, the first to feature Superman, champion of the oppressed. The way the story goes, a distant planet was dying of old age, so a scientist puts his infant son on an escape pod which lands on Earth. The child is taken in by an orphanage and he's given the name Clark Kent. As a baby, he's already exhibiting extreme feats of strength, but as he reaches maturity, he starts to develop insane abilities. Fuck. Let me get a drink of water from my Rainforest Cafe glass. Now, Superman has a whole host of iconic abilities, but at his inception, he basically only had superhuman athleticism. He could leap 1/8 of a mile, raise tremendous weights, run faster than an express train, and nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin. Action Comics was an anthology magazine published by Detective Comics Incorporated, which will eventually become DC Entertainment. I bet at least 67% of you didn't know that DC stood for Detective Comics. Anyways, in 1939, Detective Comics decided that this character of Superman was popular enough that he deserved to have his own solo series outside of Action Comics. So, they released Superman #1, which expands on his origin, explaining that he was found by Jonathan and Martha Kent, and then they adopted him, which is where the name Clark Kent comes from. If you're wondering what the point of having 2 ongoing Superman comics at the same time was, basically, in Action Comics, it was anthological, so it was 2 to 3 issues telling small, enclosed stories. However, in the Superman comic, it was one overarching story being told in the long run. Oh yeah, I forgot that almost every popular comic character has at least 2 to 3 comics running at all times. Shout out to Batman Superman's World's Finest. Everybody forgot about that ever since the Absolute Universe started. The comic's still great. Throughout the years, the character gains a bunch of new superpowers, like his iconic ability, telescopic vision. Yes, I hear you, this is a kaleidoscope. Shut the I have to give props to James Gunn for actually using this forgotten ability in the movie. There's a POV shot from Superman's perspective where the camera zooms in, and that may have been unintentional, but still I'm counting it as a use. Eventually, in the early 1940s, he develops the ability to fly, which is first introduced in a radio play of all things.
Today, as our story continues, we find him hovering with his curious power above a quiet highway in Indiana.
His telescopic vision eventually evolves into his X-ray vision, which then evolves into heat vision, which then becomes its own separate ability with lasers around 1951. The character of Superman quickly becomes a huge success, which leads to the creation of a short film series in 1948 starring Kirk Allen. It also spawns an iconic television series starring George Reeves called The Adventures of Superman. This show starts rocketing Superman's success even further. It ran from 1952 to 1958. Almost exactly 1 year before the murder of George Reeves, which was suspiciously ruled a suicide. What, you thought I was going to elaborate on that? Anyways, in 1959, the comics introduce Ice Breath. Editor note, I wrote, this closes out his primary arsenal of abilities, but I just forgot to finish recording the line. In 1978, Superman became a global phenomenon after the release of the first Superman feature film, starring Christopher Reeve and directed by Richard Donner. This film was the gold standard of Superman movies, and in my opinion was completely undefeated until about 20 days ago as of writing this. And the rest is history. Richard Donner hands off Superman to Richard Lester, who makes Superman 2, which is a pretty good movie, and he makes Superman 3. which is a movie. Editor note, I fully forgot there was a 4th movie in that series, which I think tells you enough about it. Fast forward a couple decades and we get Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, which is an alright show, but it's greatly overshadowed by the vastly superior Superman the Animated Series. Editor note, it's also overshadowed by the fact that Dean Cain is a pig. Unfortunately, I don't think Superman the Animated Series really gets the praise it deserves, but again, it had to stand up against all of the other DCEU stuff, which is top tier. Unfortunately, the 90s came with an edgelord agenda, which translated to being anti-Superman, because everyone thought he was too kind, too caring, too idealistic. Fucking loser. We then got Smallville, which was extremely important for Superman because it brought him back to a teen audience and made him relatable, and it expanded a lot on his upbringing and the mythos of his other characters. The show is all about Clark becoming Superman while making him more relatable and introducing a bunch of other DC heroes who guide him along the way. Although, some of those heroes were interestingly adapted. The show is also 10 seasons long, and Clark doesn't become Superman until like the very end, so it may be the worst case of Surf Dracula I have ever seen. And now, it's time for Terminology 101. Today's lesson, Surf Dracula. Surf Dracula is a term used to describe a series that takes forever to get to the fucking point. It stems from this tweet.
Back in the day, if you did a TV show called Surf Dracula, you'd see that fool surfing every week in New Adventures. But in the streaming era, the entire first season gotta be a long-ass flashback to how he got the surfboard, until you finally get to see him surf for 5 minutes in the finale.
We then got Smallville, which was Then we get Superman Returns, Man of Steel, and Batman vs Superman, which, in that order, are the 3 worst Superman movies. If you disagree, you can argue with my baby shirt. Superman Returns has its heart in the right place, but the movie is just not that entertaining. I think that Man of Steel is just a bad movie in general. It's disgustingly paced, and Zack Snyder just does not understand the character of Clark Kent at all. Batman vs Superman has the exact same issues, on top of being an insultingly bad adaptation of Batman as well. I'm not even going to comment on either version of Justice League. Editor note, yeah, I may have forgotten about Superman 4, but I am a big enough Snyderverse hater that I'm still gonna pretend it's not objectively the worst movie. Recently we had Superman and Lois, an awesome adaptation of an older Superman, which we hadn't really seen on screen much yet. In 2023, we got the cartoon My Adventures with Superman, which I have a soft spot for. I think it's a great show, albeit incredibly far removed from the source material. Then we arrive in the Big 25, where we have just received what I think is easily the best modern Superman adaptation. I'm not going to pretend to be some expert Superman historian. There are tons of videos which explain his history better than this one, but for all intents and purposes, that's all you need to know. Now I'm finally going to actually talk about the movie. It feels weird to be making a video that isn't just me complaining for 15 to 20 minutes, but here I go anyways. I have so much praise to give Superman 2025 that I don't even know where to begin. So I'm just going to spin a wheel to figure it out. Looks like we're doing the cast. Every person in this film was perfectly casted and absolutely embodied their role. David Cornswet exudes so much cornball energy that I swear you could just squeeze him and extract high fructose syrup. Cornswet just captures that kind and gentle farm boy from Kansas in a way that I can't picture anyone else. Nicholas Hoult played the fuck out of the D1 rage-baiter that is Lex Luthor, and honestly it was genius casting on the part of James Gunn to offer the role of Lex Luthor to somebody who initially auditioned for Superman and didn't get the role. But I think the best casting was by far Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, because I cannot imagine anybody with more Lois Lane energy than the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Skylar Gisondo, is it Gisondo? I don't fucking know. Skylar Gisondo encapsulated the walking plot convenience that is Jimmy Olsen and is an underrated highlight of the movie. Not many adaptations of Jimmy Olsen properly capture the fact that no matter what you need, he has an ex that can help, and she wants him back so bad. Some adaptations, for example, shoot Jimmy Olsen in the head in the opening scene and completely ignore that he's Clark's closest friend. I will say that Jimmy's absence from Superman and Lois, outside of just like one episode, is what holds it back from being a truly great adaptation. Even if the reason that he wasn't there is because he was already a major character in Supergirl. The Justice Gang were super well casted too, and I can't wait to see more of them. It was really refreshing to see Nathan Fillion play an asshole again after just binging through The Rookie. Side note, The Rookie might be the greatest piece of propaganda ever because it somehow managed to humanize the cartoonishly evil LAPD. And I almost forgot, but Anthony Carrigan absolutely killed it as Metamorpho. I've been a huge fan of his since Gotham, and I can't wait to see more of him in the future. Next thing I want to talk about is the story. Without giving away the entire plot, the basic premise is that Lex Luthor is trying to turn the public against Superman out of pure hatred. Meanwhile, Superman is trying to stop what is definitely not Israel from destroying what is definitely not Palestine. The movie was incredibly well-paced and never felt slow. Apparently, the original idea was to follow 1 week in Superman's life with different sections corresponding to each day. There were originally also title cards to break up each day, but the stupid test audience didn't like them, so instead they subtly flashed the dates on newspapers to show each new day. Honestly, this movie felt like watching a comic book come to life, and each day felt like a new issue, pushing forward the main plot while also having its own enclosed story. Another thing to appreciate is that every primary and secondary character has some form of growth throughout the movie. Superman's story is about learning to be in control of his emotions and considering more carefully how he goes about saving people. Another part of his character arc, which is more specific to Clark Kent, is learning to be an honest reporter because at the beginning of the movie, he's just constantly giving himself interviews and self-glazing. Lois's story is about learning to balance her work life and personal life. Jimmy's is about becoming a more respected reporter. Lex's story is about just getting lost in the sauce because of pure envy. Metamorpho's story is about accepting that he isn't a monster. The Justice Gang story is about becoming heroes who fight based on what they think is right, and not just what serves their sponsors' interests. Certainly, this cannot be a commentary on liberal celebrities who only speak about things when it's trending. Overall, the story was very compelling, and a not-so-subtle commentary on the way immigrants are currently treated, which is very topical considering that ICE has become an actual Gestapo. Now let me talk about the 4DX experience. Yeah, the seats shake during the fights, and that's it. Waste of my fucking money. One of the highlights of the film was the cinematography. While I'm not going to pretend that it was 2001: A Space Odyssey levels of cinematography, I can appreciate how unique the visuals were. The fight scene had some classic James Gunn action with cameras moving in arcs around the subjects of the fight. The usage of wide-angle lenses made for some very visually interesting shots, and the film was bright and vibrant. It felt alive, unlike some other films. Also, I think the CGI was done very tastefully. It wasn't hyper-realistic, but it was done in a way where it prioritized just looking cool over looking super realistic, which I think is gonna make that CGI hold up a lot better in the way. I think the most important thing about the cinematography is that it stood out. It felt specific to Superman, not the DCU as a whole. The film didn't feel overly formulaic, and it wasn't afraid to be different. I only have two minor issues with this movie. One has to do with a change made to Superman's origin, and the other has to do with the extended cast. I can't complain too much because I know this is supposed to be a jumping off point for the DCU, but I do feel like some of the extended cast gets a little bit too much screen time compared to Clark, but I don't think the solution would be to cut down their screen time. I think the movie needed an extra 20 minutes of, I guess, showing Clark as a reporter would have helped a lot, and showing some more of his just everyday saving. Most importantly though, David Cornsweet's Superman felt like a real person, and it hit all the marks of a great Superman. He has a strong moral compass, he's the corniest motherfucker alive, he's a foodie, and he goes out of his way to save a squirrel! He saves a squirrel! Hey guys, what was your favorite part of the movie? When he saved the squirrel. Probably when he saved the squirrel. Definitely saving the squirrel! Squirrel. Meanwhile, certain other Superman adaptations don't even go out of their way to save people. Alright, now I'm going to be getting into actual spoilers, so I'm going to give you exactly 9.5 seconds to pause the video and skip to the next section. Okay, now that the losers are gone, I just need to talk about a few highlights from the movie. First things first, Lex Luthor fucking executes a guy in cold blood after capturing Clark and forcing him to watch. Since we were watching in 4D, they actually brought out workers and shot us in the head one by one. No, but seriously, the seat's like actually cocked back when Lex shoots the guy. It's so fucked up. If I wasn't busy being shocked, then I would have been laughing my ass off. What also stands out about the scene is that Clark immediately starts breaking down because this is the first and only casualty in the movie, and this Superman just can't fathom the idea of letting someone die. I think the best part of that whole plot thread is that towards the end of the movie, it's shown that Clark has written an article in honor of the guy that Lex killed. Earlier in the movie, there is a shockingly intimate scene between Lois and Clark where they're basically just dry humping on the kitchen counter in Lois's apartment. And honestly, all I have to say is that in 4D, it was not wet enough. All jokes aside, it really did set the tone for the chemistry between Lois and Clark and very well established their relationship right at the beginning of the movie. My absolute second favorite scene in the movie, just behind when Superman saves the squirrel, is when Hawkgirl, played by Dora the Explorer, comes in and just fucking murders the dictator, who is definitely not Benjamin Netanyahu. That was pretty cool. I think in the context of the movie, that scene was actually super important. Not just because it's the resolution of the Moravia and Jaihanpur conflict, which are stand-ins for Israel and Palestine, or Russia and Ukraine, but it's also goes to show, while throughout this movie we see Clark trying to be a pacifist and avoiding killing at all costs, that is not the same for any of the other heroes. As I mentioned, I did have an issue with one thing in the story, and that was a change that was made to Superman's backstory, in particular to do with Krypton. Basically, as the story goes, Jor-El and Lara Lor-Van sent Kal-El, their son, away from planet Krypton as the planet was about to explode, to save him from the destruction of the planet, and also to be the protector of Earth where he was being sent. But in the movie, they change it to be like the Viltrumite story from Invincible. Basically, they sent Kal-El to Earth to colonize, take over the planet, repopulate the Kryptonian species, and create a harem. Now, honestly, I probably would have loved the story if I hadn't already watched and read and know that this is kind of a little bit on the nose and a bit of a rip. Another thing is that James Gunn, he seems like addicted to making statements, because he's just gone to God knows how many tabloids and said things about the movie afterwards. He did confirm that this change to the backstory isn't going to be retconned, it's permanent. Anyways, here's me singing One Last Breath by Creed for everyone who didn't skip this part of the video.
I cried out, heaven save me, but I'm down to one last breath, and with it let me say, hold me now, I'm 6 feet from the edge and I'm thinking, maybe 6 feet, it's so far down. Hold me now, I'm 6 feet from the edge and I'm thinking, maybe 6 feet, it's so far down.
If I'm being honest, while this movie was incredible, and I definitely plan on watching it in theaters again, it's not like this was the greatest superhero movie ever made. What's most exciting about this movie is that it sets a new precedent for both the DCU and the superhero genre overall. Something that has been plaguing modern superhero films is tonal synergy. Both the MCU and the DCEU have suffered from a disease called corporate interference. They strike gold with one thing, so the corporate investors and the producers get involved and they force them to try and replicate that to try and catch lightning in a bottle. In the case of the DCEU, Man of Steel came out and did pretty well. So they decided, let's replicate that and make every DCEU movie abysmal dog shit. Although they missed the mark on that a few times and accidentally ended up making some pretty good movies like Blue Beetle. The MCU is an interesting scenario where Iron Man was such a huge breakout success that they decided to make Thor and Captain America and took elements of the Iron Man movie, but didn't copy the tone exactly. I think the whole tonal synergy thing didn't really start affecting the MCU super negatively until after Endgame. While there are definitely some common threads pre-Endgame, like most of the MCU movies shared a pretty similar dialogue style, most of them definitely shared a similar comedy style. Post-Endgame, most of the stories they haven't been interesting enough to combat the MCU fatigue you get from watching all these things that are just tonally and comedically identical with extremely similar production style to most of them too. Where Superman stands out is with its unique production style and story format, which Kevin Feige himself has stated proves that superhero movies don't have to follow a formula to be successful. Though it doesn't take place in the same universe, The Batman was a huge success and is completely tonally different from Superman. So, editor note, I was kind of just taking a crack at myself because of my pipe dream of having David Corenswet's Superman and Robert Pattinson's Batman in the same universe, but I just rewatched The Batman 2022 before starting the editing, and I honestly feel like this Batman could fit very well in Gunn's Superman universe, because the basis of the Superman-Batman dynamic is contrast. At the end of the day, I am just dying for a world's finest movie, and this would be the best route to that. I just really hope they don't skip straight to Justice League, because I do feel like Batman and Superman's dynamic when they first meet is a very important part of their characters, and we're not going to get that in the full Justice League movie. The Batman was a huge success and is completely tonally different from Superman. Peacemaker is a better example because it does mostly take place in the same universe as Superman, but it's in that weird canon until proven otherwise gray area. I don't know. All the same, it feels pretty tonally distinct from Superman, even though there are a lot of similarities because James Gunn directed both. Point being that under James Gunn's leadership, DC has been releasing a bunch of tonally distinct projects, and they've all been doing pretty well. A big concern that people had with the MCU doing a bunch of tonally distinct projects is that they wouldn't cross over well. But if you look at stuff like Peacemaker, Superman, and Creature Commandos, and they all intersect fine, plus they flourish because they don't have to fit a formula. Much like my family routinely making a voyage across the border to Buffalo, New York,
God, goodness gracious.
let's take another trip to the worst possible place. Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Now, I'll admit, I am exaggerating a little bit. Buffalo is not that bad. It just has a bad reputation. Which ironically makes it the worst thing I could have used to represent Man of Steel. Because while Buffalo has a bad reputation and is actually pretty great, Man of Steel has a decent reputation and is an unbelievably terrible Superman movie, and I believe just a really bad movie in general. When the Avengers came out in 2012, DC saw potential in a shared universe and decided to try their hand at it. At this point, because of the Nolan Batman trilogy, DC had a reputation for being the darker and grittier counterpart to Marvel. There were talks that Man of Steel was actually going to be taking place in the Dark Knight universe, but that ultimately fell through. And actually, back in the early 2000s, when the Fox X-Men movies and the Raimi Spider-Man movies were in talks to cross over, they were having similar conversations about Batman Begins and Superman Returns. What's interesting, though, is the reason that Superman Returns never actually crossed over with the Nolan trilogy. While the movie's underperformance was an aspect, they actually decided beforehand that they weren't going to make them cross over because they felt like Superman just didn't fit into the gritty, dark, and grounded universe of the Nolan trilogy. But then the DCEU comes around and says, fuck that, let's ignore all of that logic and reason and make a dark, gritty, and grounded Superman. While I don't agree with the idea that Superman doesn't fit into a grounded Batman's universe, the way that they went about it was stupid. The DCEU decided to take a overall serious tone with all of their movies. Those movies take themselves so embarrassingly seriously, and I think the biggest offender is where the DCEU started. Man of Steel. It's not the first movie to feature Superman. However, it is the first movie to feature Aura Man, chapter leader of Aura Farmers Anonymous, where he is joined by Pa Kent, Batfleck, Calvin Swanwick / Martian Manhunter, and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman signed up but was rejected because being part of Aura Farmers Anonymous requires actually having aura. The combination of Injustice and Man of Steel did so much damage to Superman's character. I'm not even gonna get into what Injustice does to his character because I think that Man of Steel is a bigger offender anyways. As I said like 10 minutes ago, Zack Snyder just fundamentally misunderstands Superman. Superman is a character who values life above all else and finds the beauty in the littlest of things. He would rather die than let a single life go to waste. This is the entire core of Superman's character, because if he doesn't care about saving people, there are no stakes. The thing with Superman is that most of his stories, it's not about if he will defeat the villain. He will, he's Superman. It's how will he defeat the villain and save everybody at the same time. That is Superman. Aura Man, on the other hand, just stands there and broods as an entire courtroom of people explode, making no attempt to save them, and he fights with a villain, destroying an entire city in his pathway, making no attempt to lead him away from that giant metropolitan area. Zack Snyder himself said that in the final battle against General Zod in Man of Steel, 15 to 20% of Metropolis was destroyed, and 5,000 people were killed. That is just not something Superman would ever let happen. And even if, by some chance, 5,000 people died under Superman's watch, that would eat away at him and completely destroy him. But that's just not something we ever see from Aura Man, whether it be left on the cutting board in between Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, or it didn't even affect him at all. I don't want to ramble too much about Man of Steel, although I've kind of already done that. I think my point is clear that Man of Steel mischaracterizes Superman so badly that over the last 12 years since it came out, Superman had almost completely dropped out of the public conscience. Prior to Superman starring David Cornswet, or Super Wet, I guarantee that if you ask 10 people who their top 5 superheroes are, none of them would say Superman. Okay, one or two of them might, but you get the point. Over the course of the DCEU, DC slowly lost most of its cultural relevance. Even the DCEU movies that were pretty good and even performed well had little to no cultural impact. Because you cannot sit here and tell me that Aquaman had anywhere near the amount of impact as Ant-Man and the Wasp. Which is insane to me because Ant-Man and the Wasp has to be like objectively bottom 5 MCU movies. I don't know why I decided to sugarcoat it and say bottom 5. It is bottom 1. It is by far the worst MCU movie, and I hate it. I forgot to get more water. We're at a point where Marvel fatigue is so strong that even the good MCU projects are flopping. The DCEU was just dead on arrival as soon as they brought in the Bat Harbor Butcher, just dispatching people with his battling gun. What super wet means for the superhero genre just cannot be understated, because this is the first superhero movie since probably Endgame to have this level of cultural impact. To a lesser extent, I think the new Fantastic Four movie is also very important for the genre, but that's a topic for another video. Superman 2025 is definitely a must-watch for anybody, because above all else, this movie captured the part of Superman that is hope. This is the first Superman movie I've watched and left feeling inspired. So many people went into this film looking for reasons to bring it down, but none of that detracts from the masterpiece that is Super Wet. Overall, I would give this movie a 9 out of 10. While I think this movie made the absolute most of the situation that DC and superhero movies are in, that's the thing. DC and superhero movies are in a situation, and some sacrifices had to be made to give the DCU a proper launch, but the final product is still an incredible experience. I cannot wait to see each and every single one of these actors reprise their roles in future DCU projects, especially the upcoming web series where Jimmy Olsen hosts a true crime podcast. All that to say, I think this movie was just extraordinary, just beyond what's normal, something greater than, something. I think the movie was just fantastic. Thank you for making it so far into the video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you didn't enjoy, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Okay, I look like an idiot, but at least I'm happy.